Another thing, when you're talking about this kind of certain kind of woke identitarian politics, like you give the example of people, being accused of, white savior behavior and, and all of that stuff. I think that some of it, obviously what I'm mostly concerned with in the book is the socialist left, because that's the political project that I identify with. But I think that there is a version of a lot of the same kind of, pathologies, powerlessness that plays out on a way bigger scale than the socialist left. That if you just think about the way that progressive political energy in general, ends up getting diverted into weird symbolic displays, thinking about the way that, like, last year we had this unprecedented wave of protests and riots after the murder of George Floyd, and you'd think that, man, we could have gotten some pretty real police reforms out of that. We did not. What we did get was we got a lot of a lot of like corporate, like HR training kind of people, like, made a lot of bank out of it. Like they did really well.
Robin DiAngelo's a household name.
Yeah, Robin DiAngelo's a household name. Yeah. Which
Black squares on Instagram. Sorry.
Yeah, no, exactly. Black squares on Instagram. That's what we got out of it. What we got out of it was like, God knows how many thousands of statues coming down, and look, I don't think you should have like statues of 19th century supervillains. If you've got a statue of Robert E. Lee in your town, take a minute and take care of that. I'm in favor of that. But also, I think it's pretty telling that after all of the really bad statues came down, people started like trying to get like gray area statues taken down. And then like it got into like things that aren't even gray area, that are like statues of people who are actually pretty good, but like, we're still doing statues. So we kind of got to come up with like, well, okay, but then they said this, then they did that, right?
Yeah.
Like let's take that down. And then you get to stuff like, my mother got really into birding in her retirement, and she tells me that there's like a move to, I remember her telling me last summer there was a move to change the name of like some kind of warbler that's named after a Confederate. Oh, yeah. And it's like, I guess,
okay.
But this is getting like pretty distant from, like anything that has to do with like actually concretely changing the way that policing works. And I think that what's going on there is, and also in more insidious manifestations, like spending your time like getting really, really angry at the person who is like basically just wants to help, and accusing them of being a white savior or whatever, or doing like kind of doing those in-group denunciations, or
just calling them a lib or a boomer or whatever.
Yeah, totally.
Get out of here, lib.
It makes you feel good. It makes you feel like you have a very radical stand against the prevailing order. Or like, like Marie Sisko last summer had she's a theater producer in New York. She had like, as her contribution to the post George Floyd moment, she created a open source like Google spreadsheet of theater producers who hadn't made some sort of statement of support for the protests.
Making lists.
Yeah, this is literally an open source denunciation list. If you don't think that's going to get abused, I don't know what to tell you. And Adolph Reed, who's been writing, about, like, first of all, if we're going to play this game, is a black man who grew up in the Jim Crow South, so I'm fairly certain that he knows that racism exists, and has been writing about the the history of racism and racial disparities and the sort of class dynamics, of movements against those things for a very, very, very long time, was disinvited from giving a speech by New York City DSA, which is, by the way, I say this with love. I'm a member of this organization, but I used to live in New Jersey. I met a lot of members of New York DSA. I'm going to shock you here and say most of them are white, right? And
what? I'm full disclosure. I say that because I'm a journalist. I'm in DSA as well, and very white. Yeah,
it's a very white organization, right?
We're both the white DSA bros. Stereotypes ourselves, so yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, lots of people look exactly like me, and
and me. Yeah, let's be real.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And because he was given it was middle of the pandemic, so it's on Zoom, but he was giving a presentation critiquing what he calls racial disparity ideology, which is sort of focusing on his example was about COVID deaths, on racial disparities in COVID deaths in a way that sort of missed the fact or obscures the fact that by far, right, 99.99% of the reason there are racial disparities in COVID deaths is there are racial disparities in poverty. You're more likely to die of COVID if you're poor for many obvious reasons. And he was and so he wrote an article about this. You can read in Common Dreams, and he was going to give a talk version in DSA where he says that kind of this ideological approach of focusing on the racial disparities per se, abstracting them away from the economic reality of what's going on there, he thinks is bad for a couple different reasons. One is it's not, if you frame it as the sort of overriding ontological issue is race, you're not building as effective a coalition as you could, because because this is something that all of the issues there should be things that are uniting people from lots of different backgrounds reflected by these economic conditions. And also, by the way, he says that a big part of his concern there was about the return of racial medicine, the idea that the sort of suggestion that you'd often get in discussions of this stuff that it was maybe there's some biological factor here leading to these divergences in the statistics, which is something that he's very attuned to, because look, I mean, race certainly as a biological category is silly made up bullshit. There's no such thing. And this is really could be really dangerous and reactionary to sort of give new life to this idea that maybe there is something biological going on there in the context of these medical discussions, which, by the way, I've got to say, a little bit of a tangent, but just yesterday we got a perfect illustration of Reed's point about why this stuff could be so dangerous and reactionary to sort of legitimize the sort of crude biological version of racial essentialism. As the NFL just had a huge settlement against former players.
I saw you share that. That was mind blowing.
Yeah, because they had in the settlement, they had to pay out a bunch of money, and they had to agree that they would stop doing something called race norming, which is that
really quick. That sounds like something they came up with on 4chan.
It does.
Like race norming. What the fuck?
It's like race norming. What's that? Which is the practice of when former players have brain damage, like a massive percentage of former football players do.
Yes.
And sue for damages, which is like, dealing with this is like a big part of what the NFL does now, since so many people, have been afflicted, with these issues. And say, well, okay, we could do tests about your current cognitive functioning, see if if you have brain damage. But in assessing this, we're going to, like do this sort of statistical manipulation to decide like how much brain damage somebody has likely suffered. And we're assuming that black players started with less, like at a lower level anyway, because there's some like statistical game that you could play, that's supposed to show that we'll generally expect that if you're making the nonsense assumption that any of this is biologically meaningful anyway.
Yeah.
So
Douglas Murray smiling, right? Or is that his name? Or I mix him with Charles Murray. Charles Murray. I mixed up the racist Murrays.
Yeah, right. But exactly, like it's Charles Murray shit. It's like it's like basically in a very like sort of I'm sure this is all stuff that like you would have had to like go through, and probably the people who are suing them had to go through all sorts of fine print in their documents with the NFL to find. But like basically they were doing phrenology, right? Like that's it's like oh, this is an African brain,
race science. Yeah, they were doing exactly. Thomas Jefferson pulling science out of their ass. So I know it's getting late where you are, and I don't want to keep you forever, but I do have one last thing, and I want to try to tie together three different.
Oh, sure. Right? So before you do your last question, just
okay.
Just let me say, like the point is just that when you look at the way that like all of this stuff happened last year. I think that what I would argue, I had an article in Arc Digital Media last summer where I did the long form version of this. People can check out. It's called "Overdosing on Symbolism." But what I think is going on here is basically a version of the specific thing that happens to us on the left, but like on a much wider scale, which is like. Essentially, I mean, just to be a little bit crass about it, like if you don't really believe that you're going to win, you look for other sorts of battles that you can fight, or other ways that you can sort of exhibit, your convictions, that aren't really about trying to change the material world. Actually changing the horrendous, militarized, brutal way that policing works in America is an incredibly hard lift. Because like this is like these are policies that go back for several decades, longer than that, but like I think even in terms of specific ways that's gotten worse, right? These are policies that go back for several decades. I would argue that like basically there was a point in the 70s when like we could have expanded the Great Society, the welfare state, and ameliorated some of the social ills that come out of poverty that way. But it was both politically and literally cheaper to manage the social ills of poverty through a more militaristic and carceral, kind of way of managing people on a street level. And actually reversing any of that is incredibly difficult politically. Yeah. But man, like getting somebody fired or changing the name of something or knocking down a step, I mean, all that's easy. So like, all right, if I don't really believe that we'll be able to do the hard thing, we might as well, take a run at the easy stuff.
Yeah, kicking someone off a speaking engagement is not the hard lift that, undoing Nixon's war on drugs, or whatever other thing. Yeah, which like you mentioned explicitly militaristic war on drugs.